can look at us by way of partnership. We can take India to China, to Afghanistan, Central Asian republics, Russia, Iran, Europe. And if they can be part of the CPAC on good terms, by way of dispute resolution, we can look after the northern India. Amazing. So this is what is bringing in CPAC. And ladies and gentlemen, CPAC for Pakistan is only half of the dream. Half of the dream lies in Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey, Central Asian republics, Russia. So this much of correlation of Pakistan with the world. Now, I want you to choose the best part of the world from this world map. Where is it that you want to locate your country? Where do you want to go? So geography is unchangeable. Let me identify for you a region of the world marked green. To me, this is the best part of the world. We have maximum resources here. This part of the world has actually been a driving engine for the world. This has provided energy to whole of the world. And we know which is this part of the world. This is Islamic world. Can you look at it? That this best part of the world, how contiguous it is, how co-located it is, and can you identify where in this part of the world is Pakistan? Who has the responsibility to look after this part of the world, which is breaking from within, which is breaking by a design? Who is the best country in this who can take the onus of responsibility? So, ladies and gentlemen, we have to rise beyond the CPAC, and we have to reach out to Africa. Let me tell you, the world is changing, yes, but to me, the future world is Afro-Eurasia. While US can continue to be a superpower, why not? But the actual world will be Afro-Eurasia. And within this, Pakistan is a connectivity pivot. It can bring the world close. And I even want to propose that the Indian Ocean should be renamed as Afro-Eurasian Ocean. Within this, we need to become a massive trade corridor. And if we can become a massive trade corridor, obviously we will be a massive trade hub. We will be a massive economic hub. We will be a massive industrial hub. And the Balochistan, 44% of Pakistan, you can declare this land as industrial hub of Asia. Why not? We can co-produce there and do whatever we like. Balochistan, where myself and General Amir Riaz have been, nobody pays any attention to it. That's why we reached to such a situation. If you look at the potential of Balochistan, Balochistan is one province which can have 8 common border markets. Balochistan has maximum fisheries. Balochistan can have maximum livestock. Balochistan can have maximum fruits. Balochistan has maximum wind energy. Balochistan has maximum solar energy. Balochistan has maximum coal power generation. And name a country which can come up along with its coastline, in addition to Karachi, with 4 more mega cities, 4 more Dubais. This is potential of Balochistan, this is potential of Pakistan. Pakistan blessed with $1 trillion mineral riches. So what all I have said, obviously Afghanistan, unstable Afghanistan, does not allow for the time being to yield that kind of potential. For that, a quadrilateral traffic in transit agreement is already in place. So having talked of this, introduced to you what is Pakistan, obviously this is not free of threat. And I just want to identify for you, then what are we faced with? When Asia was predicted to be that the future century belongs to Asia, of course, till then it was philosophy of containment of China. Thereafter it transited to pivot to Asia. When that was criticized, then it was called as rebalancing Asia. And now it is called as Indo-Pacific. What US has declared in its security strategy, China and Russia have been declared as revisionist states. Where are they? In Asia. North Korea and Iran, rogue states. India declared as a strategic partner, net security provider. Though things are improving with Pakistan now, but Pakistan was referred to in the context of providing shelter to terrorist groups. And to have a hold in Asia, US has hugged India to make its own economy viable. This is Indo-Pacific strategy right marked before you. Up in the north, you see the red dot, where NATO and Eastern Europe is made to consume 2% of its GDP for the defense. That is to prevent the resurgence of Russia, presence in Afghanistan, India, presence in Indian Ocean and Pacific. This is Indo-Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, the biggest challenge that we need to understand is that our region is altered. Our region is altered, and Pakistan is affected directly and indirectly. And within this region, just see India's defense budget and Pakistan's defense budget. And US is empowering India as a strategic partner to mitigate China. This has induced critical imbalance in the region. In fact, this looks as US is exporting war or instability, and India, which can get everything from within Asia, is betraying Asia and is importing instability. And Pakistan is over-relying on its nuclear capability. Just let's look at it. Riding the tide on the behest of US, India is carving a space for limited war. It continues to pose threat of conventional war despite the nuclear. War has become perpetual. And in the earlier session, we have very adequately covered hybrid war, cyber war. This is to assail our internal vulnerabilities and fault lines. So, ladies and gentlemen, if we look inward, we are faced with the threat that somebody is assailing our internal fissures, fault lines, vulnerabilities. When we look at the borders, we are faced with cold start strategy. Readily arrayed forces are sitting right on our border. So what is it? Do we have to be surrounded? Are we surrounded with that kind of threat, internal and external? Should it become entrenched dilemma? With that kind of future that I've shown you, can we take it? Okay, let me very briefly explain to you the response. My first and foremost thing is, we are a resilient nation. 40 years of war in Afghanistan, more than 2 wars with India, 20 years of own war against counterterrorism. Pakistan is there. Pakistan is great. Therefore, in any given situation, you should always see, is it reversible or irreversible? That will gear you up to do your job. And I personally feel that on the inner front, everything is reversible. This is how we were assailed in the north. The main was in Balochistan and Karachi. This is how somebody wanted to make us. This is what we did. We stalled all of them. We are already a winning nation. And to that political, social, and everything, all our difficulties. As of today, if there's a question that you belong to or are from Pakistan, but do you have a Pakistani heart? Yes, we have a Pakistani heart. So this will put the internal issues in place. We have to consolidate our success. We have to change our attitude. We have to improve our governance. This will take care of hybrid. With that, we have to induce technology. On the national posture, before I say, because I have to align force posture from the national posture, so I would say, at the national level, our option 1 is economic progression and well-being of people. Option 2 is the same, option 3 is the same. What do we need? A compatible foreign policy of what I have talked about. We have to pursue Kashmir, we have to assist in Afghanistan. And now is actually the hard-hitting part of my presentation, which is force posturing. But of course, we need to have something in the background which I have already built up. Ladies and gentlemen, so far, till we become nuclear, we were following defensive-offensive strategy. That meant that we will absorb the offensive, we will launch a counter-offensive, we will destroy those forces, but we will also launch an offensive or riposte in a vacuum and capture spaces. And we will end the war on a favorable note. This served us very well. And actually, issue is after we became nuclear. When we became nuclear, Indian military thinking threw up the concept of limited war despite being nuclear. And ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan consented itself in checkmating the full-scale war and acknowledged that yes, limited war is a possibility, as limited war was within our capacity. So this is how it was a default acceptance that yes, there is space for war. The limited war can be there. And this gave birth to cold start strategy. Pakistan prepared hypotheses for limited war and trained for it. And that is how the phenomena of threshold came in. Spatial threshold, attrition, economic, patience, pain thresholds was introduced. That we were accepting war till these thresholds were crossed. And we also thought that upon initial failure of deterrence, it was perceived that deterrence will be re-established during the war. This to me is again a misnomer. How is that possible? Nations do not seek war by accident. When your adversary has sought war by a design, so how do you re-establish intra-war deterrence? Then we thought of notion of victory and we found it in denial of victory. And we thought of war termination strategy and we thought that international community will come up. And the Indian hawkish military thinking professed to call Pakistan's nuclear bluff. This is another misnomer of the nuclear area. Fragility of instability, stability permeated to keep the space for war alive. In response, ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan prepared low-yield tactical nuclear weapons to respond to limited war. Indian threat to use massive retaliation, even if it was a tactical nuclear weapon. So Pakistan then adopted full spectrum deterrence or quid pro quo plus policy. And that is how a new normal was established. Today we are working at full spectrum deterrence and QPQ plus. But if you see it, fact of the matter is that concept of limited war keeps the war alive because Pakistan is ready to fight half of this war, assumed half of the war. Now, full spectrum strategy keeps the war alive when we say Pakistan will respond in whichever spectrum India seeks war. Ongoing, keeping the war alive. Both sides leave a room to fiddle with deterrence, and instability, stability syndrome prevails. War prevails. I will skip cold start strategy. I thought I will explain it to you. Unfortunately, Indian military thinking permeated, and we not only accepted but followed the Indian military thought of limited war. We believed and prepared for its possibilities. We agreed to fight a limited war, half war, hoping that international community will intervene or we will be able to re-establish the deterrence. And we banged on the brinkmanship. Indian military thought of limited war remained prevalent. Resultantly, space for war remained. Today, what I want to recommend in this fourth posture is throw the Indian military thinking of limited war out of window with all its concomitant aspects of threshold and intra-war deterrence. Refuse to fight assumed limited war, half war, as it cannot remain half. This is completely flawed thinking. Prepare and profess for full war with its dire consequences if the deterrence fails. Eliminate space of limited war, which will incidentally eliminate the space for full war. War will be no more relevant. Reorientate to seamless offensive defense. There's no space for war. Just say it. We are heavily relying on our nuclear capability due to conventional asymmetry. War is a war, limited or full scale. There are no thresholds, no intra-war deterrence, no bluffs. May it be mad. Mutually assured destruction. Let that be the new normal. So my force posturing for the future is seamless offensive defense. There's no space for war. And although we have a lot of tension, but bottom lines which I think we can draw with India is, if we cannot be friends, let's not be enemies. Otherwise, we will destroy each other. So Pakistan, ladies and gentlemen, belonging to everyone, becoming a massive trade corridor, a credible and mature nuclear state, has a great future. We have to get this space for war out. And if we can become like that, it's great. I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, the fourth session of the seminar would be moderated by Air Vice Marshal Sohail Malik, retired. Air Marshal is currently Director Technical and Industry at the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies. An aeronautical engineer by profession, he has over 36...
The global environment in a persistent state of uncertainty. Shifting from unipolarity to multipolarity, growing technological differences, changing alliances, and growth in military technology are causing radical transformations. Influence of new technologies like cyber, artificial intelligence, space, aeronautics, hypersonics are already influencing critical decisions at the uppermost level. Terrorism, transnational crime, cyber attacks, proxy warfare has morphed the generations-old concept of hybrid warfare into its modern character. Gray zone activities have blurred the boundaries of war and peace, extending the battle space to all spheres of human activity. With conflict of interest being a permanent feature of interstate relations, all states, irrespective of their size and interests, are struggling to safeguard their national interests. Under these conditions and transformations, the importance of force posture has been elevated, especially so for the countries dependent on their self-defense on others as far as reliance goes. Accordingly, the concept of force capability covering the aspect of training, quality, and disposition of force also requires a renewed appraisal. This session of the seminar covers these two very important topics, with the third being an analysis of PAF's successful Operation Swift Retort on February 27 last year, where Pakistan Air Force effective strategy, superior tactical execution, and professional excellence sustained deterrence in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, we have distinguished experts with us on the panel to discuss all these important issues. Moving on to our first topic, that is force posturing for the industrially independent and dependent countries.
Finds bonsai, which have the same morphology than except for the scale, than very large trees. I think we can find in the defense domain some kind of bonsai armed forces model, which are complete but on small scale, like the French model, for example. And of course, you can find large tree model like the American one. But there are also incomplete models of armed forces, which are resulting from a deliberate choice of not returning certain capabilities. For some time, it had been the case of the British model, which was lacking, for example, aircraft carriers and maritime patrol aircraft. Thirdly, there is, as already mentioned, an industrial dimension. The defense industrial and technological base directly conditions the level of autonomy in the production of defense equipment. The United States, China, Russia, France are countries which have the necessary tool to design and produce themselves, or almost, the wide panel of defense equipments, from the most sophisticated like nuclear weapons, nuclear submarines, satellites, jet combat, to the most rudimentary like infantryman's equipment. But for all other countries, they are depending on military supplies from abroad, and this situation clearly undermines their strategic autonomy, since they are exposed to supply disruptions, limitations of employment, and even limitation of export when it comes to sub-assemblies which are integrated into equipment they produce themselves. The second parameter is the level of strategic ambition. And regardless of their political stature or their economic power, countries display a wide variety of strategic ambition. This one can be very modest or even non-existent, like in the case of Costa Rica, a country without an army and a defense budget. But beyond this emblematic case of Costa Rica, this situation of very low level of strategic ambition is a situation we can find in Western Europe, where you can find very rich countries which are displaying a low level of strategic ambition and therefore are spending very few for their defense. And some figures clearly put this situation in evidence. In 2019, last year, for example, NATO members spent an average of 1.63% of their GDP for their defense, even falling to 1.55% if you put the United States out of the calculation. And the richest European country, Germany, last year spent only 1.36% of its GDP for defense. These are fairly low numbers, but added to this, there's also a very small part of the defense budget which are devoted to equipment, since it averaged at 16.3% in NATO last year. Again, a very low figure. But you can also find configuration in which the strategic ambition is very high, especially if you compare it with the effective means to serve this ambition. We find this kind of discrepancy between ambitions and means in North Korea and Iran, for example, two countries which are managing this situation by favoring equipments, defense equipments, with a very high strategic added value. And at the same time, there is an impact, a negative impact, on the overall coherence of their military tool. Pyongyang is developing a nuclear program and a ballistic program, while accepting to maintain at the same time obsolete conventional forces. As for Iran, without even mentioning the nuclear issue, one can only take note of the very developed character of its ballistic program and its high ambitions in space. Even so, most of the military capabilities of this country are remaining very modest. But in both cases, limited financial resources have led to underfinance quite many military capabilities. In order just to focus on a few pieces of equipment with a high strategic value, equipment which has to be produced locally in full autonomy. And the third parameter, as already mentioned, is by the objectives of a defense policy. And again, we find a wide panel of options in this regard. According to their history, to their geography, to their culture, to their interests, to their inspirations of the moments, but also according to the range of possibilities, states select specific objectives for their defense policy. Some countries, above all, seek military power. The most rational option for these countries is to purchase abroad, off the shelf, military equipment in quantity as large as possible. In 2018, for example, Saudi Arabia spent 8.8% of its GDP on defense, the equivalent of some $68 billion in 1 year, quite a big amount of money. This country has equipped its military forces with an impressive quantity of highly sophisticated defense equipment, but we can reasonably question its level of strategic autonomy. And Israel, whose defense depends heavily on American assistance, is more or less in the same case. And preserving strategic autonomy can be precisely the main objective of a defense policy, sorry. And for the countries making this choice, this leads to implement an industrial policy in favor of the defense sector. It also leads to acquire the necessary means to assess in full autonomy a situation, namely strategic intelligence capabilities. And for those countries which are nuclear countries, it also leads to maintain at the highest levels the credibility of their strategic forces. Military superpowers, the United States and China again, are obviously in this category of countries, but you also can find some medium powers like Russia and France. If these countries produce an insufficient effort, their policy in favor of strategic autonomy may have a negative impact on the overall coherence of their military tool, because this one can be too much focused towards the strategic level and not enough towards the tactical level. The defense of a territory can also be the structuring element of a defense policy. This leads to the development of an essentially defensive tool. Switzerland finds itself in its scenario with a well-equipped and very efficient defense system, but a system which is unable to project forces abroad. Another configuration is the one of countries whose defense policy is structured by the management of a local antagonism. This leads them to react according to the disturbing neighbor with a risk of escalation. And it has been the situation of France and Germany for quite a long time during the 20th century. Today, it's the situation of the two Koreas, and at a lesser extent, a situation of Saudi Arabia and Iran, India and China. Other examples could be given. But in all those examples, substantial defense efforts are produced, and armed forces models are developed to best counter the adversary in the classic logic of the fight between the sword and the shield. So we pass through the three main parameters of force posturing, according to my point of view. But of course, there are obstacles and oppositions in any force posturing process. And I think the very first obstacle is the financial obstacle. The cost of armaments keeps on increasing, and everyone knows the law of Augustine, this American industrialist, who declared in the 80s that in 2054, the American defense budget would allow only to pay for one combat aircraft if the increase in their cost continues. And to this trend is added another one in many countries, which is a slow erosion of their defense efforts in several decades. And I can give you an illustration of this by mentioning the case of France. Between 1960 and today, the cost of a combat aircraft has been multiplied by 5, whereas at the same time, we divided our defense efforts compared to the GDP by 4. Here is a very significant, very serious obstacle to any proper force posturing process. And then there is the industrial obstacle. And there's the effect of what is known as globalization we are observing in our societies, especially in Western societies, a dynamic of deindustrialization, which also impacts the defense sector. And combined with this dynamic, one can observe in several countries which are retaining a defense industrial base, operations which are plundering industrial wealth in the form of hostile takeovers of defense companies and massive data theft by means of cyber attacks conducted by some of the most advanced countries. As a result, it becomes increasingly difficult for the overwhelming majority of countries with a defense industry to maintain it. And after the obstacles, there are the oppositions, political oppositions. Lord Palmerston, a dominant actor of British diplomacy in the 19th century, declared, "England has no permanent enemies, England has no permanent friends, England has only permanent interests." And today nothing has changed. It's still the same. It's still the interests of nations that guide their policies. And the more powerful they are, the more they have the means to influence and even to constrain the defense policies of other countries. And I give again, to be neutral, a French example. In 1964, for example, after the Six-Day War, France puts an arms embargo on Israel. And the Israeli Air Force, at that time fully equipped with French aircraft, had no other choice than to turn to another supplier, in this case, the United States. Today, the governments of arms-producing countries naturally continue to use their freedom of exporting or not exporting. But added to this, in order to restrict the export of foreign defense equipment incorporating American components, the US government also uses ITAR regulations, the scope of which varies to be in line with the US interests of the moment. This is a question we are facing in France, and which leads to seek a de-ITARization of French defense equipment. With the exception of the two superpowers, United States and China again, and to a lesser extent Russia, all countries are confronted with these difficulties to such an extent that they have no choice to look for new ways of developing a suitable model of armed forces. If not, they engage themselves in a dynamic of military regression. Therefore, the question arises of the ways and means likely to provide an appropriate response to these difficulties. In this regard, alliances and partnerships seem to provide part of the answer. They make it possible to limit investments. It is a so-called burden sharing, and also to leverage synergies. They take many forms of varying levels of ambitions. First of all, it can be a political and an economic union, playing in favor of the overall strategic autonomy of its members. This is the logic of the European Union, of which one concrete achievement playing in favor of strategic autonomy could be mentioned. And I'm making reference to the Galileo satellite navigation system, which is already used by 1.5 billion people on Earth, and which will soon allow the European armed forces to emancipate from the American GPS system. An alliance can also be multinational and military by nature, and the emblematic illustration of this case is given by NATO. For more than 70 years, it has enabled an effective collective defense of its members, thanks in particular to three elements: its nuclear dimension, the very strong commitment of the United States, and its famous Article 5, which states that an attack on one member is an attack on all members of the alliance. And finally, less ambitious partnerships can be established between a number of countries around a given issue with the logic of cross-dependence, industrial cooperation, or pooling and sharing of resources. In Europe, in this latter area, for example, we have set up a European Air Transport Command, which brings together the resources of the 7 member states, part of this command, a command with both an operational and an organic role. And in the field of industrial cooperation, the French, the German, and the Spanish are currently engaged in the program of a future combat air system that they could probably not develop on their own, given the scale of the financial and technical resources to be mobilized. But without this program, the F-35 would impose itself everywhere in the West, and dependence on America in the field of combat aviation would be absolute. So after considering alliances and partnerships, the second path likely to be followed to circumvent the difficulties that most countries encounter in terms of force posturing is that of acquiring the most efficient equipment. By most efficient, I'm pointing equipment offering the best operational value for the minimum cost. And in this regard, acquiring the most technologically advanced equipment should not necessarily be considered the most expensive option. Indeed, the most advanced technology offers not only the operational superiority, but also to reduce the forces format. There are many examples demonstrating this argument, but just to mention one, remember that in the 1991 Gulf War, the US stealth fighters, high technology fighters, only flew 2% of the total number of air sorties and destroyed 43% of the targets. That is a good demonstration of an efficient equipment. Relatively new ways of interacting with an adversary are also to be considered in this perspective. We have talked of cyber war this morning, and capacities allowing to conduct cyber attacks are suddenly very efficient and of great interest. The Stuxnet computer malware, according to specialists developed by a dozen people in a few months, put an halt at the Iranian nuclear program in 2010, if I remember well. So in this circumstance, a very substantial strategic effect has been obtained at a very low cost without entering into a logic of war. And of course, after the equipment, I must have a word for training. The most sophisticated, the most efficient armaments cannot give an operational superiority if those who serve them are not properly trained. But I don't want to elaborate anymore on this subject, which will be discussed in a moment by my British colleague on my right side. But training is obviously an essential element of any force posturing process. And for this reason, it has to be considered very seriously. So it's now time for me to conclude, and I wish to do so by insisting on 2 points. First, from my perspective, there's no single path to success in force posturing. What applies to one country doesn't necessarily apply to another whose ambitions, interests, and objectives are different. And second, with the exception of military superpowers, all countries are facing significant obstacles and oppositions in their force posturing process. Therefore, they should consider joining alliances, establishing partnerships. They have to acquire the most efficient equipment and raise the operational level of their forces to the highest point. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, General Steininger. Ladies and gentlemen, an analysis of the core technological developments and the emerging nature of warfare points towards the requirement of a paradigm shift in the conduct of next-generation training. To dilate on the emerging trends and practices in the sphere of next-generation training, our second learned speaker is Air Commodore Simon Edwards. Air Commodore Simon Edwards joined the Royal Air Force in 1990. He is a qualified flying instructor on Tucano and a Central Flying School trophy holder. He has attended the Joint Services Command and Staff College at Shrivanam, and alongside his advanced course, completed his master's degree in defense studies. He has worked at the Directorate of Joint Capability in the Ministry of Defense and commanded number 99 Squadron of C-17s at RAF Bryce Norton. During this time, the squadron supported the UK and Allied forces in Afghanistan, flying an unprecedented number of aeromedical evacuation sorties. He has also served in the Ministry of Defense as Chief of Staff Strategy and Senior Policy Advisor in the National Security Secretariat, before attending the High Command and Staff course at, again, Shrivanam. On promotion to Air Commodore, he has now returned to Air Command as Assistant Chief of Staff in the capability area. I now request Air Commodore Simons for his presentation, please.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Good. Thank you very much for that introduction. President, thank you for the invitation to be here. I've never spoken at a conference like this. I don't know what to expect. You're going to have to go with me and want me to succeed. Imagine I'm giving a speech at a wedding and you're going to enjoy it. I've been asked to speak about training the next generation, and I'm going to do so through the lens of the UK military's recent completion of recapitalising its entire military flying training system. I'm going to use that because it's a really good example. It's a really timely example, and I hope to explain why as we move on. And I've been living the journey for the last few years as the programme director, so there's a fighting chance I know what I'm talking about. I would welcome challenge at the end and questions. Some of the things I say might be questionable. That's a good thing, I think, at a conference. And I hope that you will find it interesting, and I hope that I will keep to time. So, I'm going to talk about, forgive me, that's not the right slide. Okay. Right, not to worry. So I'm going to talk to you about where we were. I'm going to talk to you about where we are. I'm going to talk to you then about what that means to us as we move forward and where we're going to get to. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we might get there, what questions, what challenges that might pose, and how we might move along. Slide pack's gone a bit awry, so I'll just get on with it. If you look back to the 90s, you'll see a Royal Air Force as a UK military flying training system. It's a light aircraft and elementary trainer. It's called a tutor. Then we've got a basic training aircraft called a Tucano. And then you've got the Hawk T1. We've just spent years and millions of pounds replacing that capability with one that looks, the presentation's not right, don't worry. The one that looks at first sight quite similar. Could I have a microphone, please? This will be better. So what we've done, we've recapitalised our fleet. We've got an aircraft called the Prefect now. It looks very similar to the Tutor. We have the Texan T6. It looks very similar to the Tucano. We've got the Hawk T2. It looks very similar to its predecessor. And if I put slides up behind me of those aircraft types, they would look the same. And at first sight, it would appear that we've spent time, money, and effort just buying a new version of what we had before. But nothing could be further from the truth. That would be very, excuse me, just press B on the keyboard, would you? Thanks, and just leave the slides be, it's fine, thank you. They would look very similar, but actually underneath it all is a hugely exciting aircraft fleet. We've got an aircraft which, there we go, you can see we've got, all right. You can see inside the new aircraft types, it's very different. The top right of that is the cockpit from the new Prefect aircraft. That aircraft is, just leave the slides be, would you? Thanks, sorry, it's just distracting. Thank you, there's no need for any more slides, just can it. Thanks. And if you look at the aircraft types, you'll see that inside them are very different. So we've got an elementary flying training aircraft now. It's a turboprop. It's very powerful. It's very capable. It has an autopilot. It can fly in airways. You're sitting side by side. So it can do so much more than just be an elementary flying training aircraft. It can also, for example, offer multi-engine pilot lead-in training, perhaps. Who knows? You may only have one engine, that doesn't matter. The Texan T6, hugely advanced aircraft, a whole generation away from the Tucano it replaced, and very, very capable. And in fact, other nations using it to train people to go directly to the F-35. And then the Hawk T2, a generation ahead from the T1 it replaces. And of course, we've been so successful with that aircraft in downloading training from our conversion units on the front line that it makes a real difference. When you learn to fly the Typhoon, the operational conversion unit effectively now starts on the Hawk. And the new flying training system that we have put in place is enormously promising. And what we've really done is give ourselves the raw material to move forward and to make a real difference for the future. Let's try the slides one more time. Let's give it a go. Hopefully it'll catch up. Just spacebar will work. Thank you. Only because my slides are just pictures and they're quite interesting. So just give us one moment and we'll see what happens. Please bear with me. All right. So while we're sorting that out then, we've just got to ask ourselves what's right, what's next, and what's best. Bear with me. Okay. Yeah, the slides have gone a little bit backwards, I think. Not to worry. Okay. So where are we going? We're going to this future. This is the Royal Air Force's future. Note the UK military's future. We've got to ask ourselves how we're going to train for it. How are we going to really train for F-35? How are we going to really train for that aircraft there? That's Tempest. Tempest is an idea. Tempest is a future combat air system. We've also got to recognise that we're getting back in the game. We are growing enormously in the UK, our capabilities. That's a P8. It's just arrived. We've got to recognise that not only do we have the challenge of training pilots for our future, we also have the challenge of training the rear crew that we need. And that's a remote pilot air system cabin. We have to recognise with the advent of Protector the increasing importance of GSTAR systems operators in that environment, a growing number of people, how best to train them. Do they need live flying at all? Do they need an element of live flying? What is it about their training that we need to focus on? And we also have to recognise that we have an increasing fleet of rotary equipment and an increasing demand on those people to work in ever-challenging circumstances. And so building the entirety of our training system and ensuring it is able to keep up with the next generation of their challenges is something that we have to face. So how might we do that? Well, I can conceive of this. That's our new Prefect, turboprop, powerful, wonderful aircraft. There is no reason why you can't go from that jet, miss out the T6, and go straight to the Hawk. No reason at all. And then from that, of course, straight to Typhoon, and then your compatriots on the course. Well, do you know what? That aircraft there is a tutor. University Air Squadron students fly that. Anyone who's flown that, has done well on that, has proficiency on that. There is no reason why they can't go straight to Texan. We used to do it in the 90s, we can do it today. And from that, there's no reason why, at least in principle, you could miss out the Hawk and go straight to F-35. Now, of course, that is a bit of a leap. Other countries are considering it, other countries are doing it. And ask ourselves what lessons we say that if you're going to embrace synthetics, you can use those synthetics to train people, but of course it doesn't give you experience. Just because I can take you and you're proficient, I can understand how well you learn, I can perhaps understand how you learn, I nevertheless can get you qualified, but nothing quite beats experience. So use the synthetic aspects to make sure that you're maximising every opportunity, and this perhaps is an example of that. Now, we brought this centrifuge into service a year or so ago, and it was brought in really for safety reasons, to prevent grey out, to ensure people were compliant with regulations, etc. But what it has also done is made sure that people can go flying in this thing. It flies enough like an aircraft to give you a genuine experience, and it will pull 12G in a couple of seconds. So this thing here makes it so you do less flying on the OCU for that aspect of your training. And other things we need to ensure we keep up with synthetics so that the live, when we fly it, is absolutely the maximum value. Because actually, it's all about this guy. The next generation learn very differently from how we learn. They are more used to synthetics. They have different expectations. It's possible that as they come through university air squadrons, possibly even other formats, we could understand how they learn. It's absolutely right that we should be able to increasingly look at the individual and think about how we might map things to them. At the moment, we tend to have a system which is the same for all. It matches all. And actually, it's not about a system. It's not about the aircraft platforms. It's about the person. You're training an individual. So when we ask ourselves about how that guy learns, the better. There's another thought for you, which is that perhaps it's okay to try something on him and for him to fail it. That's not something we like to talk about very much in military training, but why not? Why not put him through one of those augmented reality events? Why not then give him a go on a different pipeline? Why not see how he gets on at going straight to Texan? And if it doesn't work, bring him back, it's fine. Put him back in at the other end and learn and get feedback. And slowly but surely develop a system that works and is smarter than the one we have today. Because we're going to have to. I don't think there's any nation on earth that can afford to not get the most out of its investment. We've invested a great deal in the raw material we now have as an Air Force, and we need to make sure we get the most from it. And also, the last time I've looked or spoken to anybody, I can't find an area of the world where there's enough pilots. Certainly where there's enough military pilots and military fast jet pilots, all the more so. So we have to look at doing things more differently and get more out of the investments that we've made. And you might have heard about Project Astra. This is the Chief of the Air Staff's, well, it's a marquee project, and it's real, and it's happening. And at its heart, Astra is asking yourself, how do we get to the next generation of the Air Force? And there's nothing more important than this. So at the heart of Astra, amongst many other things, is also asking ourselves how best to maximise the investment that we've already made and the issues that I hope to have covered. And that's all I have. I hope that's okay. I hope that's introduced some food for thought, and I very much look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Air Commodore Edwards. Ladies and gentlemen, PF's prompt and effective action following the February 19 Pulwama incident put a dent in the myth of Indian military prowess and sustained deterrence in the region. To present a deeper analysis of the event, PF's role in deterring threats to national security and its force posturing requirements for the future is our last worthy speaker of the session, Air Marshal Javed Ahmed, retired. Air Marshal is presently serving as the Vice Chancellor of Air University. He holds a master's degree in Defense and Strategic Studies from Air War College and a master's degree in War Studies from National Defense University, Islamabad. In his 40 years of commissioned service as a fighter pilot with Pakistan Air Force, Air Marshal has flown several fighter aircraft and served in senior command and staff positions. These include command of the prestigious Combat Commander School, command of an operational base, Assistant Chief of Air Staff Plans, Chief Project Officer JF-17 Fighter Program, and command of Pakistan Aeronautical Complex, Kamra. His specialty areas of research include analysis of aerospace development policies, doctrine formulation, implementation strategies. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to invite Air Marshal Javed for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Avium Sohail. President Cass, members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I understand as the last speaker of the day, I stand between you and a very well-deserved cup of tea. I am also cognizant that I have to keep all of you interested in this presentation, as I feel almost a lot of areas in the presentation has already been covered. So I will do my best to do justice, to keep all your 86 billion neurons active and interested in the presentation. So bear with me for the next 20 minutes. Excuse me, once we talk about PF's perspective of sustaining deterrence. Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan has been at the center of a regional struggle for security and stability since its independence 72 years ago. At the core lie the lingering legacy, territorial ambiguities left on Pakistan's borders by the British exit, and superpower interests and rivalry in the region which continue to create uncertainty. A deep analysis of the last half-century presents a story of Pakistan's quest for progress in an environment shaped by efforts for political maturity, economic stability, international ambivalence, hybrid and terrorism concerns, and serious challenges to sovereignty. All along this journey, the Pakistan Air Force has played its role silently with a firm grasp on national security, as well as a role in nation building. It has constantly adapted its force postures and development plans to cater for upcoming challenges, remaining at the forefront of thwarting coercive strategies and playing a vital role in enhancing Pakistan's deterrence potential. The Pulwama episode last year and its aftermath culminating in a befitting response by PF to sustain deterrence by conducting 6 strikes and shooting down 2 Indian aircraft, the first manned aerial kills since the PF shot down the last Russian fighter in 1989, and creating conditions for a helicopter fratricide is a case in point. Ladies and gentlemen, behind this short, precise 30 minutes action by PF were years of preparation and an enviable level of competence and preparation. A force structure which trained hard and strived to be the best in business. Now, this is not rhetoric for a very professional force which has modestly and reservedly remained at the core of Pakistan's military strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan has remained the epicenter of coercive strategies for decades. Whether it be its nuclear program, support for superpower coalitions, or thwarting regional hegemonic aspirations, it has seen all forms and manifestations of coercion, diplomatic, economic, military, spread across the physical and psychological domains, applied directly or indirectly, discreetly or openly, implemented through sanctions, arm twisting, and outright aggression. The list goes on. These periods of regional turmoil trained PF well in honing its skills and looking for indigenous solutions. I will only cover a few national security challenges in the last few decades to highlight PF's force posture, role, and its contribution and preparedness to tackle national security challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll start with the bear trap, the Soviet-Afghan War. Nearly 3 decades ago, the Soviet Union pulled its last troops out of Afghanistan, ending more than 9 years of direct involvement and occupation. The USSR entered Afghanistan in 1979, attempting to shore up the newly established pro-Soviet communist regime in Kabul. As millions of refugees poured into Pakistan, the Soviet fighters and Afghan Air Force bombers began bombing Pakistani villages along the Pakistani-Afghan border. Thus began PF's involvement in the long-drawn Afghan aerial war. With no major ground operations, PF was the only force deterring Soviet bombing of Pakistani territory. The entire PF mobilized to counter hundreds of sorties flown 24/7 by the Soviet Afghan aircraft, who typically believed in large forced employment. Thousands of day and night combat air patrols were launched from central and northern PF bases. The Afghan war tested PF along its operational breadth. Every operational pilot, whether a wingman, pair, or section lead, experienced the Afghan combat air patrols. In all, PF shot down 8 intruding Afghan aircraft, including the heavily armored Su-25 Frogfoot aircraft flown by Colonel Alexander Rutskoy, who later became the Vice President of Russia. The Afghan war operations helped PF refine tactics, implement firm rules of engagement, and instill a discipline to conserve stamina to fight a long-drawn war. While the US may remember the Soviet invasion era as Charlie Wilson's war, PF's force posturing in defending Pakistan's territory and saving hundreds of lives of one of the largest refugee populations in the world, 4 million in total, is a part of history. Ladies and gentlemen, it is ironic that only after a decade, the US became embroiled in a war against its former allies, the Mujahideen, facing the same tactics it had helped nurture and mature. The ensuing instability caused inside Pakistan and the colossal loss of life and resources is another topic. But PF's role in ensuring success of the counter-terror operations is worth discussion. The lessons on military use of helicopters in difficult terrain and against insurgent groups equipped with famous Stinger-class man-pads were well established in Afghanistan. Accordingly, it was difficult for Pakistan's land forces to evict well-trained and settled terrorist groups along the Afghan border without sustaining heavy casualties. Moreover, the use of populated areas by these groups presented additional challenges. PF was thus called on to support Pakistan's counter-terrorist effort by undertaking ISR and offensive precision missions. Thus, starting 2004, with Operation Al-Mizan, began another decade of PF operations to evict battle-hardened criminals and terrorists. Operation TriStar, Fort Ladda, Falcon Sweep, Rahe-Haq, Sherdil, Rahe-Ras, Rahe-Najat, etc., Zarb-e-Azab, and Raddul Fasad are a few in the long list of joint operations. Did PF have to adapt to fight counter-terrorist operations? Yes. PF carved out a strategy, identified capabilities, procured and indigenized hardware, devising stringent SOPs and an elaborate command structure to prevent fratricide, and trained hard to conduct operations. Besides other aspects, the major lesson learned by PF pertained to gaining expertise in precision strikes, which paved the way for Pakistan Army to conduct kinetic operations with minimum losses. In short, force posturing and air action by the PF was a major preventive factor in Pakistan's counter-terror operations. Ladies and gentlemen, synergy amongst all forces and PF's operational readiness was at its peak when the Indians decided to take on Pakistan last year in February. We can discuss the episode in detail, answering critical questions to draw valid lessons. Let's start with the environment in February 19. Pakistan bashing sells in India, and so it did in election season, which was in full swing. February 19 was characterized by a combination of volatile Kashmir, frustration of Pakistan's role in the Afghan peace process, a snub for India, political pressure due to the Rafale scandal, and a questionable 5-year performance by the BJP, which did not win a single state seat in December 2018 elections. Did Pulwama come as a surprise? No. In early February, a CAS study predicted a stage-managed violent incident followed by limited military action to garner political support. The study advocating a quid pro quo plus response was published on 27th February, the morning the PF struck back. What were the facts and the fictions in the Indian narrative on Pulwama? The Indian narrative painted Adil Ahmed Dar as a terrorist. In fact, young Adil, born and bred in Kashmir, decided to take on the Indian troops in revenge for his humiliation and being shot in the leg. His target of military personnel was legitimate, and his act of resisting occupation legal, as per Protocol 1/97, which designated Kashmiris as victims. He was a legitimate combatant under Geneva Conventions. Why were the Indians keen on a surgical strike? The 2016 fake surgical strike after the Uri incident on the line of control set a wrong precedence. The BJP had already won accolades for its storytelling. Why did the Indians use the air option? Line of control firing, hybrid warfare, or UAV attacks do not fetch votes. Moreover, in election season, following the US-Israeli model to hit small countries and the glamour of an aerial strike was irresistible. The level of Indian electorate looking for a Bollywood hero and a hyperactive media also played a role. Mr. Modi had to do something theoretical to sway voters. What was the Indian air and war termination strategy? None whatsoever. Mr. Modi was the sole strategist who required support in elections. He even predicted poor radar coverage due to clouds. In a room full of fanatic zealots, the Indian air chief most likely succumbed to political pressure. All other stories, such as calling Pakistan's nuclear bluff, setting a new norm, successfully carving a space for conflict under the nuclear umbrella, etc., were all cooked up much later to save face. You can often hear this narrative amongst Indian think tanks today. What lessons can be drawn from the air war? Air power as a prime policy tool with strategic effects and its swift escalation aspect were validated. Striking 4 targets and downing 3 aircraft by PF contributed to crossing the Indian humiliation cum embarrassment thresholds and caused a near strategic paralysis, forcing a nuclear warning, an aspect missed out in the fog of action and not highlighted by international observers. Pakistan challenged the Indian military myth and escalation dominance and put a serious dent in its credibility. The red lines and equilibrium were restored in 30 hours. Pakistan's response set a new precedence in the regional calculus in sustaining deterrence. What was the role of the media? The 10,000 newspapers, 1,600 satellite, and 400 Indian news channels created a war hysteria through an unprecedented fake media campaign to deceive the Indian public to a false sense of victory. The pressure later forced Indians to award the pilot Abhinandan a Veer Chakra for being shot down, and ironically, a Vayu Sena medal to the 5 pilots who missed their targets, as well as the poor souls killed in the helicopter fratricide. How was the IF fiasco viewed in India? For the world's second largest army and the 4th largest air force, the morale ebbed low. It was an embarrassing task for the Indian military commanders to set aside integrity and lie to the media, but the political leadership lied profusely. However, IF's failure has been a godsend for the military industry. More Rafales and spicier bomb procurements are planned, spending around $300 billion in force modernization plans, with the air arm consuming the bulk of funds. What is absolutely clear is the fact that the arms inductions would create more instability in an already volatile region. What were the political implications? The fake narratives repeated incessantly during the election campaign boosted Modi's ratings, leading to a BJP's landslide win. What was the role of the Pakistani leadership? Pakistan's Higher Defense Organization took a firm stance of responding to Indian aggression and fully backed Pakistan Air Force leadership in taking a bold decision. The popular verdict went down well with Pakistanis as well as the international community, which praised Pakistan's efforts to de-escalate in the face of an irresponsible adversary stuck in a political survival battle. PF ended the disastrous Indian misadventure on a winning note, exacting 3 attrition aircraft and 1 bonus pilot, a fact that had significant strategic implications for sustaining deterrence in contemporary warfare. Ladies and gentlemen, where is India heading? In short, a very dark alley. Having alienated Kashmiris first and now the entire Muslim population, India may well be heading for a split. it is almost impossible to bridge the gap and the rift created between the Hindu hardline fanatics and the Muslims as well as other minorities. It could well be 1947 Part 2 again. Where do we stand after 1 year of the episode? At a very dangerous juncture. The Indians will never look inward at their own problems. Something catastrophic is bound to happen in India. It is only a question of time. You cannot suppress 10 million Kashmiris and 210 million Muslims for long. The seeds of discord have been sown. In the world's largest illiterate democracy, even if Modi goes, the new government will not survive for long. BJP will be back again. In short, India has a serious problem. How many more Adil Ahmed Dars and Burhan Wanis are ready to take on the occupying forces? Just how soon is debatable. With a false narrative and a fascist agenda, Modi has been cornered. Would the public pressure be too high and the media berserk in future? Definitely. Will the IEF get another chance to settle scores? Highly debatable, as the Indian strategists know how badly IEF failed. Despite that, funds galore are flowing the IEF way. What is the force posture of a globally ambitious rogue state which is radicalized internationally, regionally, and even for its own people? Is power projection possible without the hard coercive power tools such as hybrid, including cyber, technology controls at one end, and space weapons, aircraft carriers, and aerospace forces on the other? Is air power the quickest hard power projection tool of contemporary warfare? The employment worldwide does suggest so. Accordingly, India is set to spend billions on revamping IEF. So what will be the offensive mode this time? Cyber, drones, FATF, water stoppages, etc. With the allies obsessed by Indian markets, it is easier to make Pakistan a scapegoat in any future episodes. The world is yet to know the proofs after Pulwama, but then who cares? How will Pakistan respond in future? Without doubt, Pakistan will respond aggressively every time. It cannot afford not to. It would be naive to assume that Pakistan has no options. Will Pakistan look at novel counter moves? Yes. Closing the airspace alone for Indian airlines would sink Air India, Asia Air, Costa India, Go Air, Jet Connect, SpiceJet, etc. A single counter-missile strike in depth would expose all Indian cities, even on the eastern coast, and send planners scampering to the drawing board. Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of future strategies, for the IEF, despite its inductions, it would be fatal to cross the borders again. The PF is prepared. It could well be quid pro quo plus this time. Air power in Pakistan has used its competence in all dimensions of power projection. In resolute defense of territory against a superpower in the Afghan war, in coin come anti-terrorist operations, and in offensive counter-air strike, as well as detection of the Indian submarine at sea last year. However, Pakistan's air power would require to maintain its advantage to sustain deterrence. This would require investment in emerging technologies with end-to-end technology controls such as artificial intelligence and counter-strike, first shot, long-range air-to-air and air-to-surface weaponry with an indigenous blend. For India and Pakistan, the contiguous borders with millions settled on both sides have changed the demographics drastically. As was evident after Pulwama, the weight to be hit at a time and place of choosing is a nerve-wracking dilemma for the Indians. If one counter-strike was enough to embarrass the Indians, how many rounds will it go this time before they take out the nukes again? Ladies and gentlemen, PF's force posture over the years has been responsible, mature, and dynamic. The PF doctrinally continues to prepare for the next generation challenges. This seminar is just one such initiative. Future PF force postures would remain responsive, aggressive, and tech-savvy. In time, the Rafale and S-400 would be countered with technology and strategy. Moreover, can a handful of Rafales and few batteries of S-400 defend the 3,000-kilometer Indian border and 3.2 million kilometers area of the entire Indian state? Almost impossible. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, the use of air to achieve policy objectives has seen renewed resurgence. Balakot, swift retort, shooting of the US drone by Iranians, missile attacks on the Saudi oil fields and Gulf shipping, killing of Iranian commanders by US drone strikes, and the heavy use of air power in Syria are cases in point. For the PF to maintain an aggressive force posture is a compulsion dictated by an environment on the East defined by erosion of global norms, established principles, muddled strategic thinking, recklessness, and irresponsible behavior. The Indians need to realize that security cannot be bought by spending another $5 billion on US arms. It is time for some serious soul searching to give peace a chance. Ladies and gentlemen, today on 5th March 2020, Pakistan stands firm, resolute and determined, moving ahead slowly but surely. A peaceful country, the resilience and synergy of Pakistan's systems, including the Pakistan Air Force, has been tested repeatedly and have stood the test of time and history. Pakistan's economic and strategic relevance is perpetual and needs to be taken in its right perspective, and its role as a progressive, developing state with peaceful coexistent intent needs an objective understanding. I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, with the last speaker of the session having spoken, we have come to the end of presentations. I would like to once again thank all our distinguished speakers for excellent discourses. And now we will start with our question and answer session. For the benefit of those who have joined the fourth session, we will follow, in fact, the same procedure that we did earlier. There are two microphones you will find on both sides of the room. For those who are unable for some reason and it is not convenient for them to reach to them, please identify yourself by raising a hand, and we will acknowledge your desire to ask a question, and somebody will reach to you with a microphone. Those who would be asking questions, I would request them to please identify themselves. And if your question is directed to any particular speaker, please specify so. And we'll now take the questions, and I may emphasize that for getting maximum dividend out of the time that is available to us, please be brief in articulating your questions or the comments that you have, if any. Thank you.
My name is Muhammad Ali. Thank you so much, sir. I learned a lot in the last 2 days. Very rich and enlightening 2 days. My question is aimed at General Philip. Can you briefly share your thoughts on the evolving role of air power in hybrid warfare, and particularly in the context of space militarization? Thank you.
We can take two questions at a time, one from the left and the other from the right, and then we'll have answers, and we'll follow this procedure, so on and so forth.
Thank you, sir. I'm Imran Abbas, University of Sargodha Assistant Professor. I want to ask a question to Am I audible?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sure. So one of my question is to General Steiger. Sir, the industry-independent countries usually make military technologies that are more efficient in a total war scenario. Whereas industry-dependent countries are facing sub-conventional war threat. So do you think that this difference, this key difference, plays a vital part in developing two types of industries which are threat-specific? And the synergy that exists in terms of coalition between the dependent countries and independent countries that are more of the overtures taken by the independent countries themselves. One question. And if I'm allowed to have a second question to Air Commodore Edwards. Sir, you mentioned about that British have gone through to a technological leap in inducting the F-35 and other systems. Now, those systems are very technical when it comes to the sensor fusion and situational awareness. Whereas the training in terms of other countries who are not having those kind of systems are actually based upon what the technology offers. So in case of technologically advanced systems, the problem is that probably the pilots will eventually end up with having so much information which is even beyond their mission scope. So can there be a system or a training module be adopted where a pilot-directed acquisition information system be there available so that it will remain mission-specific instead of having a huge information that is a burden instead of an advantage? And secondly, with the defensive systems being incorporated like S-400, at least on paper, if not battle-tested, these systems are kind of a shoot-and-forget technologies. So how you can see that the countries who are relatively behind in this type of force posturing, they have to face such kind of threats specific as S-400 is coming within the South Asian region as well?
Yeah, the question on air power and hybrid warfare, I don't like very much the expression of hybrid warfare. Warfare is warfare with a wide range of intensity. And I think the air power can play a role in the whole spectrum of warfare, from the low intensity configuration to the highest intensity. And it can play the role both in the tactical field and the strategic field. And it can play a role, like it was mentioned yesterday by Colonel Olson, in a lot of different missions, from ISR to strategic strike to support of a land campaign, air transport, and so on. So I'm sorry not to elaborate a lot on hybrid warfare, a concept in which I don't trust very much. And the second question was about the industry, but I'm sorry I didn't get the question, so I cannot answer to it.
So I'd like to know if the industry is supposed to be dependent on the nature of what the country faces.
Ah, okay. No, I don't think the industry has to be dependent of the nature of war a country can face. First of all, it's difficult for a country to know exactly which type of war it will face, and considering the time needed to set up an industry, you cannot match an industrial development program and a force posturing process. I tried to show this by starting my presentation making a reference to the Maginot Line, this very important military program in the French defense back in the 30s, which was totally useless given the actual conditions of the war in 1940. And I think that the real question for a country is a political question, whereas it wants to be strategically independent or not. You know, there was in the Roman Empire this Caracalla decision. The Emperor Caracalla gave the nationality to people in the Roman Empire. It was something like 1800 years ago. And of course, there was a deal in in this decision. The decree gave the Roman nationality to people in the empire, but on the other side, those people were giving the responsibility of their defense to the Roman Empire. And there is this kind of Caracalla's decree flavor sometimes, especially in Western Europe, where you can find lots of countries which are abandoning any idea of strategic autonomy and are relying on the United States to defend them. And of course, when you make this kind of decision, you're not keen on developing your own industry in the defense sector.
Well, thank you for your question about system overload when you're seeing things you weren't expecting to see. I think my presentation was an example of that. So what can I say? I think if the question revolved around if you are looking towards next generation aircraft and yet the system is what you have, I don't think the training system you have is ever going to be quite perfect for the frontline that you need. One of the aims of our flying training system was to address the ever-growing gap between our training fleet and our frontline fleet, but you're never going to quite close it. And so I guess if you look at what I was trying to explain about how do we make the most of what you've got, I think the challenge is to look at the system that you have and see how you might leverage it, to see how you might do more with it. And if, for example, your concern about your frontline operational mission is data overload, system fusion, or, I don't know, paralysis of the pilot, well, I can conceive of, even with quite a basic training system, the ability to simulate, emulate, and throw that challenge at a student aircrew quite readily. You could do it on the ground. You could certainly do it virtually. And I think you can certainly equip people with the skills that they need in order to deliver that frontline mission. But it also leads to another point, I guess, which is that when we've looked at our flying training system, we recognise that the general principle is that you should take the pressure off the frontline training and put it onto your, what you would call your training system. And it might not always be the best way of doing business. There is always going to be the management of the interface between what we would call phase 2 training, the system that I showed you, and then phase 3 training, the operational conversion unit. And it's okay to ask yourself, actually, could we, can we download that aspect of our operational mission to our training system? Or do we just need to bite the bullet and hold it on the front line? And so if you've got a system that you know is suboptimal for your front line, you've just got to look at what you've got. You've got to look at how you might enhance it and ensure the pilots have the necessary skills. And then at the end of the day, just tell yourself it's okay to keep some of those high-end activities on the front line. And actually that principle of not uploading everything is valid anyway. That often it's just not worth the time, trouble and effort of downloading something that could be done quite simply on a frontline conversion. And anyway, do you know what? When it comes to sensor fusion and system overload and the capacity of the pilot, or indeed the operator, that comes with experience anyway. I guess all you can do is give them the tools for the job. On defensive systems, I didn't quite get the question, but I'll try and answer it anyway, and do correct me if I'm wrong or grab me afterwards. I'll be very happy. I'm not trying to duck it. But I think the point was about defensive systems in our aircraft and how complex they can be and how we have to do them. Well, my experience of more modern defensive systems, without wishing to talk in any detail, is that they're largely the best defensive systems to just get on with it, and then they told you what they've done. Now, don't get me wrong, you need to know there's a threat, you need to know that there's a reaction, and of course that will often require pilot input, but by no means always. And so I'm not sure how best to answer that. That's always going to be a frontline challenge, I think. And I think that the key is perhaps ensuring that you have a system that tells the guy it's happening. In my experience, the thing that aircrew really want to know is what the aircraft is doing. If you take other sort of threats, in a modern airliner, if an engine fails, it's already been dealt with before the pilot knows anything about it. But he wants to know about it. So he wants to be ready to react, and it's the same with defensive systems. So I hope that's answered your question. If not, please do grab me afterwards. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Zohaib Iltab, and I am from Namal University.
Just a moment, please. Air Marshal Javed, would you like to add to that?
With General Philippe's permission, I'd like to respond to the question on the use of air power in hybrid warfare. I think in the last 2 decades, air power has seen a lot of role. It has played a lot of role in the hybrid warfare. And if you start to look at what happened in Afghanistan and how different weapons systems as well as air power developed in Afghanistan, which led to the maturity of the unmanned systems coming in to take up major roles which were being flown by manned aircraft. And if you take the same warfare and apply this to Syria, where you have combatants on both sides and the requirement for information, as well as the miniaturization of systems, they played a very big role in Syria as well, where the airspace has been divided into 2 parts. Anything below 2,000 feet as the tactical air power, and below that and beyond higher levels at the strategic levels. So I think technologies coupled with the unmanned systems have played a very big role in hybrid warfare.
Next question, please.
Okay, sir, my name is Zohaib Biltab and I'm a student of International Relations in Amal University. My question is from General Nasser Janjua. Sir, you talked about Eurasia and future of Eurasia. So Brzezinski, in his article in Foreign Affairs in 1997, talked about that Eurasian landmass will have a decisive impact on American global supremacy and historical legacy. So when you see that there is a decline of Atlanticism and there is a rise of Eurasianism on the one side, so that can make this area of Eurasia a global part of the global power struggle. So how it will impact the peace in Afghanistan and later, and how it will impact the Pakistan as well.
My name is Rabab Abbas. I'm doing MS in International Relations from Bahria University. I wanted to ask if there's any possibility of coexistence between Pakistan and India. I'm fully aware that under this leadership, current leadership, BJP and Hindutva narrative, which has built such a perception that even if the leadership goes, the society remains. And the perception is like they're teaching, it's in their syllabus, they're teaching their students that God was trying to make man. He was kneading the clay, he overcooked it, and that was the African race. He tried again, he left it raw, that was the white race. Then he perfectly made a man that was Hindu, not even Indian. So they believe, they're teaching this to their students, and they have that superiority in them that these lands belong to Hindus, not even Indians. That's why we see all this going on now, because it has a background. And this first about Pakistan and India, obviously under this narrative, it is not possible that in even a century coexistence could be possible here. As we have seen in Europe, their situation was worse. Their fight was even bad comparing to what Pakistan and India has. Still, is there any possibility of coexistence? Because both are rivals and both are nuclear powers. And this region, not just South Asia, it is the most important, most dangerous and strategically important area of the whole world. And it is dangerous because both rivals are nuclear power. The second question is about all these advancements and progress that is going on here in, there is a school of thought that says that whatever innovation that is being established or done by man, that should be for man, not for me. So what do you say about, what is your opinion that if there is progress being going on in technology, obviously for potential war, don't you think that could be used or converted to good cause, humanitarian cause in that area? Thank you.
Sir, I'm Wing Commander Rajiv from Bangladesh Air Force. I'm presently doing a Yawar course in Yawar College. Sir, I have specific questions to General Zanjua. Sir, by adopting full war response deterrence in context of Pakistan, will you not create an environment of war hysteria that will create concerns to the international players? Put your comment, please. Thank you.
We'll have answers for these 3 questions before we take additional ones.
The first question was with regards to the concept of Eurasia, which I take it as a natural possibility to come about in coming times. The question is then related to peace of Afghanistan. I think instability of Afghanistan will continue to affect it, because unless there's a connectivity, unless the whole region becomes interactive, go to and come from, so I think this will be hindered. The region will remain barricaded, and Afghanistan will continue to act as a barrier. But now that we see a hope, we have taken a start. It's a good beginning. It still has some long way to go, and let's hope that Afghanistan becomes peaceful, becomes stable, and that is how it is a mutual prosperity. This will be economic interdependence, which will expedite and hasten this process of Eurasia, Asia and Europe becoming together. Then is the context of coexistence with India and declaring it most dangerous. This is a serious question, and why you tend to think like this is purely how India is conducting itself. So being its neighbor, you tend to think like this. So I don't think this is a responsible way of conduct, that your neighborhood feels threatened. And of course there are men who are sane, of course there are men who are insane. They make the difference. People come and go. This world has been shaped by the leaders, by the people. So there are bad leaders, there are good leaders. But whatever the circumstances are, we have to face it boldly. And we are there to stay. Please do not have this idea in your mind because of somebody else's conduct that you cannot exist, that you cannot coexist. I'm sure a progressive world is because of the saner people. And of course, India has taken a course which is self-destructive in its character. India is going to take a burden which is ideological in its character. And that will be very bad. Okay, it will be bad for India, but it will be for a very long time. And people will really be suffering. That is their conduct. I'm sure India, Indian people, the nature will take care of it. What do we have to do is that in the given situation, we have to be mature, responsible, have our guards on, play a role which is most needed for coexistence. We are a peace-loving nation. We are not threatening anyone. And I think India, Indian people will learn their own lessons, which course they have actually taken on. And there's a lot of resentment within India. But perhaps these are initial days, which is not very clear. About force posturing that I have suggested, seamless offensive defense. That the world will have its concerns. Of course, world is always concerned how the nuclear powers conduct themselves. There was a narrative that the extremist will take over nuclear weapons of Pakistan, and how we have defeated the extremist, how we have defeated terrorism. So how we have defeated that narrative. So there will always be concern. But how do we conduct ourselves? That is also seen. So we have to conduct ourselves as a responsible, mature, credible state. We don't have to profess war. We don't have to blow it up out of proportion. We only do that much which is needed. And my suggestion is that we should eliminate this space for war. That is, again, to seek peace without fighting a war. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. We can now take the other questions, please. Starting from my right.
Thank you, sir. My question is to General Janjua, sir. Sir, you very rightly pointed out that there is no space for war between Pakistan and India. But given that India has an asymmetry in its favor, India is now turning to what those pseudo-Indian military scholars are advocating to the Indian military.
Continue in a moment, please. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Honorable Foreign Minister of Pakistan, His Excellency Makhdoom Shah Mahmood Qureshi. You may please continue with your question now.
Thank you, sir. So, given that its limited warfare doctrine has failed, it has now been being asked to the Indians that you should increase the attrition cost for Pakistan military, not going towards a limited scale war, but make LOC and other areas so much active, given that Pakistan has certain economic constraints. Now, the part of that question would be to Air Marshal Ahmed, sir.
May I request you to please, right from the beginning, repeat your question so that we could
sure,
take
sir.
the Honorable Chief Guest.
Sure, sir.
People involved in
Sir, given that you have just presented that there is no space for a conventional war between Pakistan and India, now there are certain pseudo scholars, I don't want to name them, but they are advocating Indian military that you should increase the punitive cost to Pakistan Army's action. Anyway, whatever they blame it or take an excuse. So by increasing those punitive action, they want to raise the attrition cost for Pakistan, given that Pakistan is in a certain economic constraint across the LOC or other theaters. Sir, would you think that offensive defense will increase the strategic burden of escalation on Pakistan? Or we should have to remain with the more mature and constrained response to the rising of the attrition cost, which Indians actually want to achieve? And secondly, to Air Marshal Ahmed, sir, so given that the Indians have this foolish obsession of fighting a two-front war, under the cover of that China threat, they are actually making equation more asymmetrical towards Pakistan. And given that the air power has become the tool for political objective achievements, what do you think that Pakistan's Air Force posturing would be required if India does reach to the level of that force number which they think is necessary for a two-front war? Thank you, sir.
Sir, I will request you to take the first question.
increasing the cost through punitive measures on Pakistan military, firing on LOCs. This is an ongoing activity, and the kind of animosity, unfortunately, we have with India, and the kind of disputes that we have inherited. So this is an ongoing process that we are going through. Now, coming to the space for war, I want to say that there is a space of war today available, and that has given birth to the concept of limited war. When I said that our future posture has to be seamless offensive defense, I'm actually looking at eliminating that part of that space for war. I have suggested that we should refuse to accept the concept of limited war, because it will not remain limited. We should not accept to fight half war and then think that we will be able to re-establish deterrence, and then we expect that international community will come in and war will terminate. Let's put end to such a thought process, which has given space to this limited war. And this has actually encouraged the cold start doctrine. And that is why a part of the Indian forces are sitting right on our borders right away. So today we have also seen hybrid wars, cyber wars, and have known what all effects they can create. So what is happening? If we look inward, so we are faced with hybrid war. If we look outward, we are faced with cold start strategy. So should we be surrounded by war? Should we live with it? So what is the way to get out of it? So that is why I have made the suggestion that let's eliminate this space for war. Let's say war is a war. There is no half war. There is no limited war. Let's say it boldly and let's prepare for it accordingly, and let's be seamless in this. So that is what I wanted to explain.
Thank you, sir, for your comprehensive answer. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of the time allocated for our question and answer session. And at the end of the fourth session, I would like you and request you to please join me in a big hand of applause for all the speakers and participants.
May I now please request the President, Center for Aerospace and Security Studies, Air Chief Marshal Kaleem Saadat, for his concluding remarks and to summarize the key takeaways from the conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of everybody, let me welcome His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Shah Mahmood Qureshi Sahib. So we have had this conference over the last 2 days, in which we had 4 sessions and 9 foreign speakers and the rest local participants. It covered the subjects of the global order, the emerging technology debate, the nature of future warfare, and finally, the last one was force posturing. So at the outset, I would like to congratulate all the foreign speakers that have come here, despite all the risks, etc., that have been floating around in all the countries in the form of coronavirus. We are glad that all of them made it, and they made significant contribution in the success of this seminar or conference, whatever we call. For the benefit of those people who were not present yesterday, I would briefly summarize the major takeaways from the sessions that we had yesterday. And of course, subsequently, I will cover up the sessions that we had today. So, okay. The day's first speaker was our eminent Ambassador Cameron Munter from the United States. To start off with, he highlighted three main problems and challenges for the emerging world order. And these were climate change, technological revolution, domestic problems of governance in Pakistan and elsewhere. According to him, the old world order seems to be failing, but the new system has not yet taken shape. And that, of course, leaves ambiguities. To benefit from these transformations, Pakistan should bring institutional reforms and improve the way of its governance. Pakistan also needs to focus on high-end technologies, develop innovative solutions for the emerging problems, rather than focusing on small concessions or only relying on textile industry. Acknowledging the embarrassing silence on the Kashmir issue by the West, the ambassador also drew our attention to Pakistan's inability to raise voice on the issue of Muslim Uyghurs in China. This was followed by a presentation by Ambassador Inamul Haq, who in his remarks stated that states are building strategic alliances and new weapon systems to maintain their dominant position in the world. The US is responding to China's rise by following a containment policy. Efforts are being made to portray Chinese assistance as a debt trap, whereas in his opinion, it is the Western powers that have created the debt trap for the world. On India, he was of the view that Modi's internal and external policies are bringing the region to the brink of war. World must not follow the policy of appeasement for their short-term political and commercial gains. This was followed by Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani in his remarks stated that despite acute differences between China and Russia, between US, China and Russia, they will continue to compete and confront each other at the same time. He suggested that some measures for Pakistan's future strategy, and these were, number one, it is in the interest of both the US and Pakistan to maintain good relations, and these relations should maintain independent of Pakistan-China relations. Pakistan must capitalize on new opportunities to upgrade its relations with Russia. On Afghanistan, despite the hurdles and India's efforts to create instability, Pakistan must continue to work towards Afghan stability. With India, peaceful coexistence is only possible if India revokes its earlier decision of abrogating Article 370 and works constructively towards normalization of relations with Pakistan. Then we go to the second session of emergent technology debate. In his keynote speech, Sir Brian Burridge explained challenges of new technologies, including artificial intelligence, robotics, machine learning, etc. According to him, with artificial intelligence, operations in gray zone become more practical and real. Therefore, we need to look at the future of warfare and how to set rules for the likely employment of new technologies. Answering the question of AI as a force multiplier, he indicated that we needed to understand that it is only the human mind to detect where to place the cursor in this kind of warfare. This was followed by Group Captain Holt from Australia, who talked about the emergent technologies through the lens of national security and mentioned the top 10 technology trends of 2020. According to him, information and ICT are essential, and every organization is a tech company, and every employee is a technologist. Dr. Neri from Italy talked about the weapons of the future, including hypersonic weapons, laser guns, high-power microwaves, and stealth fighters. According to him, the gap between technologically advanced and technology-dependent countries is narrowing, which has increased the risks of war. It is therefore important to reform the United Nations to make it more empowering and effective so that it can play its desired role in preventing wars. Dr. Olsen from Norway gave a very good talk about the future of air power and emphasized on the importance of cyber, AI, and space domains. He was of the view that to deal with the future challenges, we need warrior scholars who think differently and appreciate air power. Then we come to the first session of this morning. AVM Fayez spoke on the role of airspace power in South Asia and highlighted future challenges which include weaponization of space and cyber warfare. According to him, India is seeking primacy in shaping the new world order through military modernization and its ambitious space plan. Pakistan controls India's Silk Route that could connect it with Central Asia. He also indicated that India wants a ring of security around itself, but due to its inherent vulnerabilities, it finds itself in rings of vulnerabilities, both internally and externally. Referring to last year's surgical strike, AVM 5 is of the view that air power has now become a weapon of choice in achieving political objectives. According to him, the future threats will not come from weapons of mass destruction, but from cyber attacks. This was followed by Lieutenant General Amir Riaz, who in his remarks stated that hybrid war has posed a dilemma and made war more complex, blurring lines between military and non-military means. According to him, we have reached a point where man's imagination and technological developments are complementing each other, and principles of combat are under great stress, thus making it imperative to rewrite the rules of war. Main target of hybrid warfare is to target political consensus. If not calibrated, it could have intended and unintended consequences and could become autonomous with the involvement of many actors. For Pakistan to fight a hybrid war, we must have political consensus, build alliances, and make efforts to convert US-China competition into collaboration. This was followed by Mr. George Sebastio, who in his talk on cyber warfare mentioned that in order to defend yourself, you would need to clearly understand the dynamics of hybrid warfare. The share of cyber attacks may be small, but their impact is immense. The objective of the state-sponsored cyber attacks, which have increased dramatically in the past few years, is very different from private ones. That is to disrupt the fabric of the target country. Next, we come to the second session of today. The speakers are right in front of you. General Janjua was the keynote speaker. In his remark, he stated that countries comprising the Muslim bloc have maximum resources. To capitalize on this, Pakistan has to rise beyond CPEC and reach out to Africa. The future of the world lies in Afro-Asia, with Pakistan as a pivot and potential to become a massive hub of trade. Pakistan is over-relying on its nuclear deterrence. That is a point that he made very clearly. He also said that we have to change our attitude, improve governance to deal with the challenges of hybrid war. This was followed by General, and of course, he made a very important point which is missed out over here. which some of you heard after you arrived, and that was that there has to be a seamless offensive defense, that there is no limited war. Either it is no war, or it is total war. So that is the point that he emphasized upon. He was followed by General Steininger, who discussed the force posturing for industrially independent and dependent countries. According to him, force posturing revolves around three parameters: strategic stature of the country, level of strategic ambition, and inspirations and objectives of the policies of the state. With the exception of superpowers, he pointed out, strong force posturing is challenging for all states due to enhanced globalization, and one strategy of force posturing does not apply to all countries. He also made that point linked to the dependence of less developed countries. That is because of the hurdles that are created by non-availability of technology or other political consideration which stop or hinder the transfer of weapon sales, etc. He proposed that alliances such as NATO, as a response towards strong force posturing from hostile countries. For weaker countries, if we can form alliances, we can perhaps defend ourselves better. This was followed by Commodore Edward Simon, who discussed Ukraine's military flying system. According to him, we needed to craft methods of learning that suits next generation of officers as per their learning abilities and prepare them for the next generation of aircraft such as the F-35. The point being made was that so far we have been reliant on various type of aeroplanes, trainers that we have, and we have tried to adjust our training programs with respect to those steps there are in the training system. But his emphasis was to put the man in the center and to see how he responds to inputs that are made and that he's subjected to. This was followed by Air Marshal Javed, who talked about the post-Balakot situation, and while discussing the role of the PF in sustaining deterrence, stated that before India's surgical strike at Balakot, CAS had analyzed the security environment and had predicted a similar action. Pakistan's national leadership took a firm stance following Balakot, which was supported by the people as well. PF has sustained deterrence with Operation Swift Retort against Indian aggression, and future posture would be responsive and aggressive. Under the given circumstances, aggressive posturing is a compulsion of Pakistan. He also made a point that with India's current policies against Muslims in Kashmir and in India, there is a possibility of further breakup of India, and he coined the term of 1947 Part 2. India is spending $300 billion towards military modernization in the coming years, but this can lead to an arms race in the region, which is really quite unnecessary. I wish to, in the end, thank all the speakers, all the delegates who came from far-off distances to attend this conference, and I'm glad as a host to see that on the fourth session of the second day of the conference, the entire hall is still full. I appreciate your interest. It probably indicates that we collected a good group of speakers, and our topics that we suggested were interesting so that we could hold your attention. I want to also thank all present, all connected with the holding of this conference, especially my colleagues at CAS, because it was a huge project that we started some months ago, and I can say with confidence that the outcome, the participation, the conduct of the conference has exceeded my expectations, and all those who were visible and those who were behind the scenes deserve my commendation, and I'm ever grateful to them. And I thank His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, for again being with us. And I would now like to invite him to give his concluding remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan's vision for peace and stability speaks to this ferment. Pakistan's geopolitical location as a pivot between South and Central Asia and the Middle East and China is perhaps both a blessing and a challenge. It is a blessing because it gives Pakistan the salience to contribute meaningfully to stability. It is a challenge because we have to navigate through more than our fair share of geopolitical turbulence. When we took the helm of government over 18 months ago, we resolved to do things differently in the foreign policy arena. We resolved, A, that Naya Pakistan would be credible and courageous, principled and passionate. B, that we would neither become part of any conflict nor allow our soil to be used against any other. C, that we would seek out and build meaningful, substantive, outcome-oriented partnerships for peace, progress, and prosperity. And D, that we would prioritize economic diplomacy and win-win collaborations for trade and development as a means to achieve enduring stability in Pakistan and the region. These principles have since informed our foreign policy conduct and helped achieve significant breakthroughs. Our actions have spoken louder than our words. These actions have underpinned Pakistan's sincere intent for peace and stability for the region. They have helped Pakistan's stature, and today the entire nation can be proud that Pakistan is looked at and viewed differently by the world. How and why are we looked at differently? Let me elaborate. Afghanistan. I was in Doha a few days ago, where we witnessed the landmark signing of the peace deal between the US and the Taliban. 29th of February 2020 was a historic day, marking the first step towards ending the long conflict in Afghanistan. Pakistan has significantly contributed to this singular achievement. For 18 years, Prime Minister Imran Khan has maintained that there is no military solution to the conflict in Afghanistan. It is a measure of his sagacity that the world has come around to endorsing this position and working towards a political solution. As part of a shared responsibility, Pakistan has played its due role in pushing forward the peace and reconciliation process. It is now for our Afghan brothers to seize the historic opportunity and work out a comprehensive and inclusive political settlement. All through the process, we've also ensured that our regional peers, the governments in Kabul, Afghanistan's neighbors, and important capitals remain cognizant of our efforts. And for 40 years, Pakistan has been host to what has been labeled by the UN Secretary General as the most protracted refugee situation in recorded history. It is a measure of success of our efforts that today Pakistan is seen as part of the solution and not part of the problem. Success against terrorism. At great human and material cost, Pakistan has succeeded in turning the tide of terrorism and extremism. Our National Action Plan is the consensual blueprint of eradicating terrorism from our midst completely and holistically. Operations Radul Fasad and Zarb-e-Azm have been resounding successes. 2019 has been the safest year yet. It is also the year we have opened up to the world with our revamped visa on arrival and online visa initiatives. This has paved the way for Pakistan's journey from a country known for terrorism to one known for tourism. The Kartarpur Corridor. Despite ongoing dire situation in occupied Jammu and Kashmir and the current slide in Pakistan-India relations, Pakistan established the Kartarpur Corridor to allow our Sikh brethren from India and around the world access to one of their holiest sites on the occasion of the 550th birth anniversary of the founder of Sikh religion, Baba Guru Nanak. In record time, what is now amongst the largest Sikh Gurdwaras in the world, Kartarpur was opened up to foreign pilgrims. Pakistanis warmly opened their hearts to welcome their guests and accord them hospitality. The Kartarpur spirit animated our actions. Kartarpur is a living testament to Pakistan's vision for the region and for Pakistan-India relations, which is one of peaceful coexistence, interfaith harmony, tolerance and amity. Bridge building in the Islamic world. Wherever possible and however we could, Pakistan, in its modest capacity, has contributed to lessening tensions and the threat of war, and promoting dialogue and diplomacy in the Middle East. We have unequivocally declared that we would not partake in any regional conflict and that we would only be partners for peace. We have been in the forefront in declaring that conflict would be in no one's interest and in calling for restraint and recourse to dialogue and diplomacy. Regional powers have acknowledged and appreciated our efforts. Crisis management with India. A year ago, our eastern neighbors' belligerents pushed us to the brink of war. India violated our airspace on a false pretext with a sinister design. The challenge before our leadership was to prevent war that would be disastrous for the region, while ensuring that the Indian aggression did not go unpunished. We were able to achieve both objectives. We laid bare the fiction of India's military might, exercised our right to self-defense, and demonstrated our will and capacity to respond to any misadventure. It was Pakistan's maturity, responsibility and restraint, but also a firm resolve to respond to naked aggression that de-escalated the standoff and helped preserve the peace. We have since seen India take a number of steps to further aggravate the situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir and indeed in India itself. Mobilized by the Hindutva-driven agenda of racial supremacy and hatred against Muslims, the RSS-inspired BJP government has moved on to take further unilateral and illegal steps in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The unprecedented lockdown has continued beyond 6 months. It is aimed at breaking the will of the Kashmiri people and changing Jammu and Kashmir's demography. India has not been content at assaulting Jammu and Kashmir alone. The Citizen Amendment Act and the National Register of Citizens are aimed at disenfranchising India's 200 million Muslims. As was predicted by Prime Minister Imran Khan, the Modi government's policies are taking a bloody and dangerous turn. The pogrom of Gujarat is being replayed on the streets of Delhi. This is a matter of deep concern to Pakistan and should be to the entire world. Hindutva and its capture of India's state institutions poses the single gravest threat to global and regional peace and security. Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan has not sought conflict with India, but we have not appeased either. We have not shied away from lending our full voice and support to the beleaguered people of Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. We have not shied away from exposing the real intent, Indian intent and agenda to the world. Today, after decades of hiatus, the Kashmiri issue is fully alive and internationalized. The world opinion is squarely turning in favor of the Kashmiris and against ruling Hindu supremacists. India is facing international scrutiny and opprobrium like never before. Incredible India is today being viewed as intolerant India and shining India as burning India. We have no doubt that the world community would clearly see the BJP government in India for what it is, an ideologically driven, hate-filled, majoritarian clique that is destroying the societal fabric and deeply hurting minorities, especially Muslims. They must be held accountable for the crimes against humanity they are committing every day. Reinvigorating partnerships. Pakistan has sought and strengthened partnerships with international and regional friends. From United States to Russia, from China to the European Union, and with leading Muslim states, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, Malaysia, the UAE, and Qatar, to name a few, Pakistan's relations today stand at a qualitatively higher plane. We have imbued these partnerships with a greater sense of direction and a deeper economic content. Under the Engage Africa initiative, we are opening up fresh avenues for economic diplomacy and win-win collaboration with our African friends. And with the restoration of peace in Afghanistan, connectivity with Central Asia will be given greater impetus. Launch of the next phase of China-Pakistan corridor, the next generation Pakistan-China Free Trade Agreement, the strategic engagement plan with the European Union, the planned $20 billion investment by Saudi Arabia, and the strategic economic framework with Turkey are just a few of the tangible outcomes. Championing international causes. We have leveraged our partnerships to champion causes that impact the developing world. Pakistan has been at the forefront in the fight against climate change, Islamophobia, and eradicating corruption. We have vociferously stood up for defending Islam and the rights of Muslims, and in calling out Islamophobia as racism and crime. We are playing our role in shoring up multilateralism and the UN system, and are contributing actively to reforms at the UN that see the emergence of a more democratic, more equal, and more effective world body. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps there could be no bigger tribute to Pakistan's contribution to global peace and security than what the UN Secretary General had to say about Pakistani blue helmets while addressing Center of International Peace and Stability at NUST during his recent visit to Pakistan. Speaking about Pakistani peacekeeping, he lauded the professionalism and contribution of our brave men and women, 150,000 of whom have been deployed to 41 peacekeeping missions in 23 countries. 157 made the ultimate sacrifice. He declared Pakistan a leader in championing women peacekeepers and an example to others. He said, and I quote, that Pakistan is one of the most consistent and reliable contributors to peace efforts around the world. In another context, he said that he had a love affair with Pakistan and its people. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now request the esteemed guest of honor to present souvenirs to our distinguished speakers of the fourth session for their valuable insights. As I now call upon the worthy speakers, I will request each of you to please come forward to accept a souvenir. Lieutenant General Nasir Khan Janjua. Air Commodore Simon Edwards. Thank you, Your Excellency. May I now request the guest of honor to accept a memento of the occasion from President Cass. Thank you, sir. May I please request the worthy Chief of the Air Staff, Pakistan Air Force, and designated guests to join the guest of honor for a group photograph.